over the next 5 years of this government. Thank you.
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker, it's great to have an opportunity to take a call in this budget debate, and it's great to have the opportunity to speak in Parliament on behalf of so many of our countrymen and women who can't speak for themselves. Mr Speaker, under New Zealand, National is going backwards. The last election, John Key promised 170,000 new jobs. It sounded great, but the reality has been all too different. Here's the Minister wandering in for the jobs machine, finally showing up in the budget debate, Mr Speaker. He knows that the unemployment statistics are that there are 146,000 people still out of work. And we say to New Zealanders, we on the opposition benches are here in this debate for you. We are here for you. What we have over here is a government that is not governing for all the people of New Zealand. They are for the rich, not the poor, arguably for the old, not the young. And the game that has been here in this budget is plain for all to see. It is a tight budget which lacks strategy, which has zero vision, and what it does have is a fig leaf of social policy like food in schools done at a trivial, pathetic scale that is nothing more than PR spin. Mr Speaker, it's bad for New Zealanders, it's bad for New Zealand, it's bad social policy, and it's also bad economics. It's bad because the government, the Minister of Finance, seems to be unfixably confused about what their job actually is in a budget. Labor knows about running surpluses. We ran 9 surpluses out of 9. National hasn't run one yet. Hasn't run one yet, a fiscal surplus. And they are just absolutely craven to run one. But you know what, Mr Speaker, while we would run one too, it is not the right question. The question here is not about balancing the government's books at the expense of New Zealanders' books. It should be about growing the pie for the whole country, about getting those New Zealanders who are out of work back in jobs, giving hope to the 270,000 New Zealand children growing up in poverty. Not tokenism, Minister, not tokenism. So, Mr Speaker, they have put all their political credentials, their hope for the 2014 election on one magical number, reaching fiscal surplus. Mr Speaker, they can't even do that right. It is a bogus surplus. It doesn't come within $1 billion of breaking even, and here are the simple facts why. Mr Speaker, it's not wafer thin. It comes only from massaging the numbers to an extent that I have never seen in my time in Parliament. Because if they didn't, they would have to admit failure in the one goal that they set themselves. So, for example, over $1 billion more than is needed is being collected from ACC levies. Officials advised them to give the $1 billion back. They are keeping 700 and giving 300 back to New Zealanders, and without that 700, they wouldn't be within a bull's roar of breaking even. Mr Speaker, they are collecting an extra $900 million in petrol tax from people's pockets. That is a tax increase on everyday New Zealanders who can't afford it, and without it, no surplus, sir. But here's the really interesting stuff. On page 30 of the Budget Economic and Financial Update are the revenue forecasts. And I have to read those as revenue spokesman, and they're very interesting. Because in the year in which they are so desperate to reach surplus, we see a sudden spike in something called tax loss offsets of $400 million that appear from nowhere and are never seen again, only in that 1 year where they think they're going to make a $75 million surplus, swamped by this magic $400 million piece of fairy dust that appears from nowhere and disappears again. Well, is that the only magic in the revenue figures? I'm afraid not. Employees' compensation jumps from an increase of 500 million to 1.1 billion. Guess what? In the year, sir, in which they are desperate to make surplus, and then tails off again. And corporate profits rise from 300 million to 1.1 billion and then drop again to only 200 million. The point, sir, is if all of these extraordinary coincidences, these funny money rubber numbers, didn't all occur simultaneously, no surplus.
It's boom bust.
It's boom bust, as my colleague says it. It actually belongs in the fiction section of the library, sir. So then the next job was to go back to the estimates of appropriations for the inland revenue, because as most New Zealanders will be aware, the government's committed itself to spending between $1 billion and $1.5 billion on the IRD's computer system rebuild. That's very interesting, sir. How much is in the budget documents for the IRD computer? Zero, zip, nil, nada, nothing. How could that be? Is it because it's capital, not operating spend? No, because there's no line here for the operating cost of the interest on that capital. They've just left it out. How could they forget to include $1 billion liability? And here we're not talking Peter Dunn. He's $1.5 billion liability. They had 500 million of flux because they don't know if they can get the project over the line. Mr. Speaker, because they couldn't quantify it, because it was so horrific, they thought they had an excuse to leave it out altogether and then claim that they had a $75 million surplus. The viewers will see ministers in the front row nattering to each other. That is a sign of extreme nervousness. People that hardly talk to each other, the rivals for John Key's jobs, pretending to be civil because they know that what the opposition is saying is true. They know there is no surplus in this budget. It is a creation of magic accounting worthy of Merrill Lynch by coincidence. Refusing to lower excessive ACC levies, kicking out forecast expenditure from 1.2 billion forecast down to 1 billion even, magicking another 200 million towards the surplus that doesn't exist. Yet another condition which, if they didn't all occur simultaneously, would not get them over that line. Mr. Speaker, you know when they're really desperate, when warring ministers have to call backbenchers to the front row to make them feel better because they can't stand the heat in the House. They can't stand the argument. They can't stand the truth. They know that they are condemned by their own budget documents. They know that there's a magic $400 million fillip at just the right time, once only in history, in the BFU. They know that they're holding on to $1 billion worth of ACC levies, and they know, sir, that they have been manipulating the books. Mr. Speaker, it's time for a whole new approach, because the world is changing. Oh, Judith Collins thinks that about her. Well, she's been taking advice from Simon Lusk, apparently, the bagman of the ugly right. Poor old Aaron Gilmore got hit by a freight train, and it wasn't Stephen Joyce's face on it. It was somebody else. We will let the public decide. The nervous laughter from the government benches continues. Mr. Speaker, in behind here we've got two views of the economy. We've got a merchant banker's view who think it's all the financial economy, and we've got the Labour Party view, which has grown up in working New Zealand, that knows it's about getting the economic engine running and people back in jobs with real industries based on real strategy, not one-off transactions that are dependent on busting the law, selling it off to foreign movie moguls or casinos. New Zealanders deserve better than that. Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure also to be fisheries spokesperson. I've just been to a very interesting presentation by the launch today of Seafood New Zealand. They have a game plan to grow that industry, and we think we can back it, Mr. Speaker. But that is based on real work, real jobs, sustainable use of resources, sir, and building towards a much better future. It is not a one-off pokey transaction that Mr. Joyce prides himself. That'll be his career high, playing second fiddle to a gambler to sell the law for a bunch of pokey machines. Welcome to the big time, Minister. Was that all worth it? Is that the best you could do? Where is the strategy in this budget? Mr Speaker, I end where I concluded. Not good for people, not good for the economy, and the numbers don't stack up.
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, I move that this debate be now adjourned.
Question.